Thank you, Warren, for the welcome, and it's good to be back with you again. It's amazing the difference a week can make in the weather. And I specifically rummaged around last night and got a jumper out of the wardrobe to bring, and dutifully left it on the bed this morning as I left. Thank you for having us again. Last Sunday I spoke to you about surviving the grieving process, and if any of you wish to talk to me about that later on, feel free to do so. But the big issue that Warren asked that we might address is, what do you actually do when somebody dies? A really practical thing. What happens when death comes to your doorstep? And I don't think there's anybody better to deal with that than Darren. Darren is highly regarded in the funeral industry in Australia, and he's going to speak a little about some of those very practical things, and then he'll take questions from you. And so I'll buzz around with a microphone and you can ask those, and I think he'll have answers for you, I'm sure. So Darren, I'll hand over to you for you to share.
Thank you, Ross and Pastor, for allowing me to be here and share with you this morning. It's been a very moving service and such inspirational music. I'm very thankful to be here sharing this service with you, but also to be just giving you a little background about what I do and funerals, etc., as Ross mentioned. We're very thankful to have Ross as a part of our Leicester family. He's been with us for some time now, and apart from offering a celebrancy work and chaplaincy work with us, where he's able to contact our families and assure that their pastoral needs are met through grief counselling. He also provides that to our staff, and in fact tomorrow we'll be officiating at my grandfather's funeral in Albury, so I'm very, very thankful that Ross is a part of our team as well. I've been a funeral director for 30 years. It seems like the blink of an eye to me, but 30 years for me is a long time to be doing something that I really love. And sometimes I struggle to actually say that to people. I love being a funeral director. I love what I do, because I can get some very strange looks, I can assure you, from people thinking, well, what are you talking about? But what I do and being able to speak with families and be with families and be immersed with families at probably what is their worst time, and we meet families on what is often the worst day of their life, is always a privilege to be able to find a way to guide, even if it's just in a small way, to guide families through what is a very, very difficult time. And as a result, the work that I do is very fulfilling. It's very rewarding to be able to do that for families. And it's something that I've treasured for 30 years. I will admit, though, things have changed quite dramatically in that 30 years also, with the way funerals are conducted. And I have an analogy that I do use, and it's sort of where we're at now with regards to funerals. And I'm old enough to still remember having birthdays where my mother would actually get all the ingredients to make the birthday cake separately: eggs, flour, water, icing sugar, and she would create the cake. And we would all get around and everyone would sing happy birthday, and really that was enough. We were happy. And Mum had made the cake and family was together and we celebrated our birthday. And then as times got a little bit tricky and people needed to work and things became more complicated, other things then started to happen. You could then buy all of those ingredients in one little box. So it was quite simple then. You could go and buy the box, make the cake, and just made life a little bit easier. Then what happened was people didn't have time to get the box. So you would go and buy the cake and have the name put on it, and we'd all get together. And then what used to happen was it wasn't just enough to have the cake. You had to then have some sort of experience attached to it. And now we're at a point where with birthdays, and I've got quite a few friends who have got younger children, where it's not just enough to have family come around and sing happy birthday. You've got to have a limousine pick everyone up and take them to somewhere else, and there's a party somewhere else. It's not everyone's sort of outdoing each other, and it's become quite an experience, the birthday, whereas I still remember my fondest memories are sitting around the kitchen table with all the family singing happy birthday. And that's where funerals have gone in 30 years. When I first started, nearly all of our services were conducted in the church. They were all burials, very few cremations. We had a priest in town who we could set our watch by 20 minutes, a funeral, every time. And you could set your watch and it was exactly the same. Different verses and different hymns, but apart from that, all pretty much the same. We then all got into the hearse, and well, not all, everybody, but the funeral directors did, and would be a bit crowded, I guess. And then we all travelled together in cortege out to the cemetery. There was generally lots of flowers, so many in fact that we used to have a top of the hearse where we could then put all the flowers on the hearse and cover them up and take them out with us as well. And then everyone went back to the family home for a cuppa afterwards. Didn't go anywhere else, or go back to home. And that was okay. I'm not saying that that's not the right way to have a funeral, certainly, and we still do a lot of that now. But what we're now finding is with technology, we've got a whole gamut of different options now to make funerals quite personal and to have that experience. Photo tributes, different music, not so much as a standard anymore. The old cookie cutter ways are quite gone. People are looking for this. And a younger generation is pushing forward on this too because they're quite tech savvy. It's interesting now that some of the major newspapers have discovered that people don't put notices in the newspaper anymore. So you can have an online only funeral notice. So that's where it's just, there's nothing in paper, you only find it out online because that's the way it's going. Fortunately for us, we've got a lovely chapel, and most of our services are still a religious service, still a Christian service. And I've often been asked about funerals, who are they for? And for mine, the funeral is certainly about the person who has passed away, but they are for us. Funerals are for us. What a funeral does is it provides a mechanism, it provides a space where people can come together and support each other. They can show that they love us, that they're there for us. And sometimes that can be without words. It can be just a hug or just a glance. And I've often thought about how things might be without services. And I'm not certainly here today to say everyone should have a funeral, because there is a certain part of the community now that have made the decision that they don't want any funeral at all. Nothing. So basically what would happen is we would get a call from the family and they would say, okay, look, we just want to have a cremation happen, we don't want any service, and we just want the ashes returned to us. And that's okay. If that's what you choose, that's quite okay. But just remember that the funeral isn't just about the service, it's about many other options, and certainly that ability to come together and share and be supportive is very important. And that was probably borne home to me with a service that we had quite some time ago that Ross was also involved with. And one of my wife's very close friends, her mother, had made the decision that she didn't want to burden her family anymore and sadly took her own life. But she had written very clear instructions that she didn't want a service, didn't want to burden her daughter, didn't want anything at all, literally just have the burial and be finished with it, which is what happened. She abided by what her mother wanted, and that's what she provided. No service, no nothing. No notices in the paper, very little acknowledgement that she had actually passed. Sometime later, my wife and the girls, they all got together. They get together about every 2 months, and they like to just have a girls' night out and go out for dinner. And this lady was very quiet and quite angry at the other girls. And my wife, Julie, who has been a part of what I do, in fact, we bought her father's business. So she's been a funeral director all her life, or been a funeral director's daughter all her life. And she knew that something wasn't right. So she asked the question. She said, Brenda, what's the problem? What's happening? She said, I cannot believe that not one of these girls rang me after Mum died to tell me that they were sorry about what had happened. And she said, well, nobody knew until just recently that that had happened. It was a private service. And she said, well, I would have thought somebody would have contacted me and just said, I'm sorry, and be there. And course, the dinner went on, and I spoke to Ross about this because I do lean on Ross quite a lot for these sorts of things. And I just explained what had happened, and he said, look, I think she needs something. I think she actually needs something. What it is, we don't know. So we rang Brenda, and Ross went to visit her, and what they decided that they would do is, quite some time later, they would have just a little service where a couple of people could say a few words, but her friends were actually able to be there to support her, which is what they did in one of the rotundas at one of the local gardens. And they just got together, and it was an opportunity then to support. And one of the girls said to Brenda, look, I cannot tell you how sorry I am that we didn't come to you, but we just assumed that because you didn't have anything in the paper and you didn't have a funeral service, that you didn't want to talk about it. And we were just doing what we thought was best for you. And that's, I guess, really brought home to me the value of what it is that we do with having a funeral service. But again, I'm not saying that you should, but if you don't, at least have some sort of gathering where family and friends can come together to acknowledge, but also to share with you that time. It's often difficult to know what to say to people. I understand that, and I've been through it personally with my own loss. But sometimes a hug is enough, and it's just an acknowledgement for where it is. So things have certainly dramatically changed in that regard, and I think probably for the better as well. I guess what I'd like to do, and one of the things today is just to make myself available to answer questions. And I'll answer any questions that anybody's got. And please be aware that there are no unusual questions. One of the things that I've always discovered as a funeral director is when I tell people what I do, and I have no issues telling people with what I do, one or two things likely happen. That's the last I see them. Or I get barreled up into the corner and I get a lot of questions fired at me. And either way is fine. I don't have a problem with either. I'd much prefer the discussion, but I can understand why people run away from me as well. So I'm certainly available to answer any questions. And if there are things that you think, look, I don't really want to ask that with the group, I'm going to be around for a little while after as well. So please feel free to come and ask me questions there as well. There's a few privileges that I'm afforded when I'm doing a funeral service. And one is obviously to be a part of that particular service and listen to it, because I think for me a funeral is above everything, it provides a sense of hope. And one of my favourite passages is John 14, because for me it's about what happens next. And we don't really know, but for me that's a guideline. In my Father's house are many rooms, and if I didn't say it, why would I say it? If it's not true, why would I say it? So that gives me hope that there is something for us to look forward to beyond what we have in front of us. And I do hear that quite a lot because it's a verse that's used quite a lot at funerals, but I never tire of it, because for me that's what gives me the hope to do what I do, to say, okay, we will meet again. And the time is really relevant to us, not for those that have gone as well. But one of the great privileges that I do have is I get to listen to people's stories every day through eulogies and tributes by families. And most people that I talk to, they go, oh, look, Dad just lived quite an ordinary life, or Mum was quite an ordinary, simple lady. And then when we get to listen to what they've achieved, ordinary lives are extraordinary. It's not on the front page of the paper, but that doesn't mean that it's any less important than what everybody else does. People raise families, they build homes, they make businesses, they employ other people. All of those things are extraordinary when you sit down and actually think about what they've achieved in life. They're not necessarily going to make the front page of the paper, but they should, because the extraordinary is the ordinary that people have. So I'm privileged at every service, and I make it a point at every service where I possibly can to listen to a life story and hear, because people have some extraordinary things that they've done in their lives. But I also then when we talk to families afterwards, when we're having a cuppa or somewhere afterwards, it amazes me how many people say, I didn't know that about Dad. Or, somebody's given a eulogy or a tribute and they said, I had no idea that Dad did that when he was young, or I had no idea that's how Mum and Dad met. And I think I don't think there's any reason, it's just that maybe those discussions don't get had. When I was growing up, both my parents worked. So I used to catch the bus down to my grandparents' house in South Albury. They lived down there. And at that stage, I thought my grandfather was an old man. As it turns out, he's actually younger than I am now when I used to go down there. But it's amazing what you think when you're little. But we used to go, and I always thought that my granddad was a grumpy old fella. And it wasn't until after my nan died, we were cleaning out her house and her rooms, and we found a box full of, Pop loved taking photos, but they were slides. We found a box of thousands of slides, and Dad went through them all and he processed them and put them on the computer for everyone in the family, and it took him years, but he did it anyway. But underneath the slides, we found love letters that he had written to Nan when he was young. He was a wool classer, and he used to go away for weeks and months on end in the wool season. And he'd write these beautiful love letters home, and I thought, well, this isn't the man that I thought I knew. He used to beautifully crafted letters to Nan. But again, without asking, who's going to ask? Granddad, did you write love letters to Nan? These are the things that I guess you don't know. So what we decided we would do is we would find a way that people, whilst we're still around, to share some of those things that maybe our family doesn't know about us, that we might like them to know about. And we've put together a little booklet that's called Your Story. And I've got probably 70 or 80 up the back. And if you so desire, please feel free when you leave today to take one. And it's very simple. It has literally got some of my earliest memories, things about my parents and their siblings, where we grew up, how we met, these things. I had to ask that question of my mum and dad too, and I got two different stories about that, but that's another story. That's that one. Things you may not know about me. Some of my fondest memories as well. Things that I'm most proud of. Things that you probably don't ask your loved ones about. Things I like to do, destinations, and how I'd like to be remembered. So basically what it is, it's giving an opportunity to record some of those things that perhaps your family doesn't know about you, that you'd like them to know about. And it's interesting now because we've been doing this for a couple of years now, and we're now having families bring these into us, and I think Ross might have had a couple that bring them into us and say, look at all these things we didn't know, can that help to creating a eulogy for us as well? And it gives a bit broader picture about things. So that little booklet I'll have up the back. If anybody wants one of those, you're more than welcome to take that and just fill out whatever it is. It's like a little mini memoir, I guess. So feel free to do that as well. I guess I'm conscious about timing and I don't want to ramble on forever because I have been told that I can talk underwater. But I'd certainly like now to perhaps open it up. I think Ross is going to bring the microphone around. Just excuse me, I'm in the hearing aid brigade nowadays and I have both sides. So Ross is going to bring the microphone around just so that I can hear a little better. And I'll move myself.
Turn this one on.
Onto this one.
Right, we're right. Okay. Who's first? Yes.
Darren, we see a lot of funeral insurance on TV these days. What's the advantages and pitfalls of this?
We do see a lot of funeral insurance now. I've had a couple of mornings where I've been at home recently and it's pretty much all that you see on the telly in the morning. So, look, funeral insurance is an insurance product, just like any other. I guess it's vastly different now, and it was part of the funeral insurance was that obviously you contributed to the particular insurance and you got a payment back at the time. And in its early days, it wasn't such a great product because the idea was that you would, from an insurance point of view, is the longer you lived, the more the insurance companies would get. And it's interesting, when they first come out, I did the exercise. I was 42 at that stage, and I worked out that I would have paid close to $120,000 in premiums by the time I got to 85 to get back 15. So it wasn't such a good idea for me. However, since the Royal Commission into banking, a lot of those things have changed, and a lot of the rules around funeral insurance have changed quite dramatically to the point where that now can't happen. It still does to a degree, but it can't happen. So what I'd suggest is, if you're looking at funeral insurance, there are other options, and probably the one that is the most common that we have is what's called a funeral bond. And that's basically, for want of a better description, a bit like the old Christmas clubs. You put money into the bond, it's in your name, and it's used to pay the cost of the funeral or towards the cost of the funeral at the time. It gets what they call bonus, which is an interest payment, and at the moment the interest payment is tied into the cash rate, so it's about 2-3%, something like that. But that product is secure as well, and it's whatever's in there is what you get. You will not pay more than that as well. So it's been regulated quite heavily now as a result of some of those things. But as I said, it was quite shocking to find out that that was the idea. Yep.
So next, anybody else? Yes.
In the same vein, my mother has a prepaid funeral, and she may move up here rather than down in Melbourne, and hers is with a company in Melbourne. If that was to happen and she was to pass away while she was here, how does that work? How does does she have to be transported back to Melbourne by that particular funeral company, or is there like a trust or something that you can draw on? Yeah. I don't know.
So the service is going to be in Melbourne or up here?
Don't know.
Okay. Look, with a prepaid, you are pretty much contracting to a particular service with a particular funeral director. So that's how a prepaid works. However, many people move. And what happens is, because the product is still, or that bond is still in her name or as a power of attorney in other names, it can be transferred. Now, however, with a prepaid contract, what you are doing is you are contracting a specific service that is not, there's no more to pay. So when you come to a different area, that may not be able to be covered anymore. But you should get back everything that you have contributed to, and if it's been in there for a little while, it will still be getting interest as well. So it should be pretty close to it anyway. But before you do anything, obviously, I would just check with the company that you have it with, let them know, look, we're probably going to move, how can we make it happen? You could probably also contact the funeral director here and say, look, are you able to, here's what we have, are you able to honour what we've got from that particular one as well? And in most cases, they'll go yes, because people do move. Yep.
Right, anybody else? Thanks. Oh, I see a hand. No, I don't. Yes.
Something I found, Darren, and thanks for your sensitive and engaging presentation. What if a family member withdraws from the funeral planning process? And what can you do to re-engage them?
It withdraws from the particular having a funeral plan? Look, if it's...
From the service and all the things...
Oh, they don't want to be involved in it anymore? Yeah, that's when it can... Look, things can become difficult. And one of the things that I guess breaks my heart the most is with what I do is family fractures. Because sadly, funerals can take a very small little family crack and turn it into the Grand Canyon. And often it's over little things, not the big things as well. And we do have that quite a bit where families might go, well, you know, you do what you want to do, I'm not going to be involved. We've still got to find a way to engage the others because they need the funeral as much as anybody does as well. One of the things that I would suggest is, and if everyone... I presume I always ask the question to ensure that everyone has a will, because the will is an extremely important document, because The will gives an executor that you appoint the absolute power over not only what happens with your estate, but what happens with your funeral service. So we've had occasions where there has been a will provided to us with two sisters. One's an executor, one's not. The one who's not was the primary carer, and the one who was the executor, who hadn't had a lot of involvement with her mum, then made the decision she didn't want any service, and no one was allowed to go and view her afterwards. And because that was the executor, there's nothing that we could do. So basically there was no viewing allowed, there was no service had. So if you have a will, by all means, certainly very important, but make sure that your executor knows exactly what it is that you want to do. And in fact, put funeral details, put your funeral instructions in the will. And then it's very difficult to get around that. But it's very difficult. We've sit around an arrangement table arranging with a family, and we can see that someone else wants to be involved, but they're perhaps not quite as strong-willed as others. So we need to find a way to make sure that they're involved in the service as well, because it's really important that everyone is engaged in that service and takes some ownership of what's happening, because as I said, even though it's about their loved one, it's really for them. Yep.
Right. Yes.
This relates to what you've just spoken about in terms of will. I lost my eldest brother just 12 months ago. He was a widower, and he'd presented a will, but a will was many, many years old. And we sometimes forget that life goes on, and one of the huge mistakes he made was he put grandchildren's names in, but there were other grandchildren born after that.
Yep.
And that is just a disastrous thing. So again, we need to make sure that our wills are relevant and up to date.
Yeah, and we've had that happen so many times where, there's been a second marriage, but the will is 30 years old and everything is left to the first wife. And although they may not have been around for some time, boy oh boy, when it comes down to that, they'll fight as hard as anybody to keep it that way. So that's when lawyers end up with very big smiles on their face.
Yes. Next. Yes.
How do you pick a good funeral director?
I don't live in this area.
Sorry?
I don't live in this area.
Oh, okay.
No, I don't live in this area, or obviously I'd choose you, but I live where there's a big range of funeral directors to choose from.
Yep.
How do you select a good funeral director? If you,
I'd go and visit. Yeah, because you can get it. I mean, as you know, you get a very good sense of actually talking to people. One of the things that I find myself, I like to look people in the eye, because for me, that's how I can determine whether they're actually being genuine with me or not. And it's very easy to do it over the phone, and you can have somebody that's fantastic over the phone, but when you actually meet them, you think, well, yeah, it's not really going to work out for me. And I know that sounds really difficult to go, the last thing I want to do is go and introduce myself to a funeral director, but it's an important decision. And when I look at the way funerals operate, I think they're no less an important family event than a wedding or anything else. My grandmother's 99 today and will be going from here to her birthday party. And I think, it's interesting because I think that's a big family event for us, but even tomorrow her husband will be buried. So again, we've got two significant family events there. And I don't put any difference on either of them, to be honest with you. For me, the funeral's just as important as the 99th birthday. So it's a very important decision. So why wouldn't you go and say, okay, I need to have a look? We're not going to go and there's a sort of almost at the moment, there's an ability now that most people, when they're getting married, they're saying, well, you know what, I may not have a church affiliation anymore, I'm just going to get a celebrant. Now, you wouldn't ring up a wedding celebrant and say, meet me down at the Gardens at 2 o'clock next Thursday to do a service. You go and introduce yourself to them, make sure that they're the right person for you. And I think that's important with funeral directors. And if use your first instincts. I always love first instincts. If your first instinct is, this is not the person for me, walk out, say thanks very much and go to the next one. And look, you can do that also if you're looking about costing. And a lot of people, we're getting a lot of calls now for people saying, oh, look, how much does a funeral cost? And we want this and we want that. Certainly when you're doing that too, and if you don't get somebody that is prepared to give you what costing you want over the phone, go to the next one. Because there's no reason why they shouldn't be able to give you at least a close idea about what the service is going to cost. And if they don't, well, okay, find the next one who will. So by all means, I would, and look, I love people coming to visit me and say hello, and this is what I do, and so that's how I would do it. Actually, go and see them. Go and see them.
Yes. Yeah.
This is a trust issue. People who have lots and lots of jewellery, possessions and things like that. And I have heard, I was a trained nurse and I'm now retired, but I have heard this time and time again about the fact that this is missing, that's missing, the jewellery's missing, whatever. Can you, what's the standard? What should be happening?
Well, when we get jewellery, we would generally suggest to families not to leave them on. So we get families to say, look, we want to have the jewellery left on. Our default is to say, look, really, you should have a think about that. If you still want to, by all means, but have a think about it. Because for mine, jewellery is tangible. And in 10 years' time, we have very few tangibles with us as memories. We have lots of memories, but we have very few tangibles. Generally, the clothes have gone off to an op shop and things like that. Life's changed a little bit. But if you've got jewellery that was worn by a loved one, that's an important piece that you have. So we would generally say to families, look, by all means, if that's what you want to do, we will attend to that for you. We would then have the families come in and sign that that's what they want, because inevitably sometimes these happen to make a point to say, you're not getting it, so we'll make sure mum keeps it, so we'll do those sorts of things. With cremation particularly, what we do is we don't cremate jewellery at all. So a family might say we want the jewellery to come with us or to go with mum or dad. What we do is we will take the jewellery. If there's a viewing, the jewellery will be positioned as it is. We then say to the family, as soon as that's happened, we take them off, we put them into a little velvet bag, and that bag goes into the ashes. So the jewellery is in its entirety. Because I guess with there's no recourse. Once it's cremated, it's gone. But by having that, 10 years down the track, oh God, I wish I had Dad's wedding ring, or I wish I had Mum's engagement ring. Okay, that's fine. We'll just retrieve the ashes from where they are. They will still be there. And I guess you can do that with a burial if you really wanted to. You could have an exhumation and they would still be there. But with the cremation, if they're left, they go. There's nothing left from jewellery with a cremation at all. So that would be our default. And certainly, if you can certainly ask the funeral director too, what do you do? What's your policy regarding this as well? Yep.
As regards funeral directors in Melbourne, Bethel Funerals are wonderful. We've had them twice, and any profits go to missions, and they're very caring.
Yep. Yeah, I know Bethel Funerals, and I know the people involved there. I was fortunate enough through my association. I've been a part of the Funeral Directors Association on their national council for 18 years, and was privileged to have 2 years as their president. And part of that 2-year journey was to visit a lot of funeral homes. So I know a lot of funeral directors from it. And look, overwhelmingly from mine, funeral directors are wonderful. They're amazing people. I've visited people out in the country who haven't had a holiday in 15 years, husband and wife, because they're afraid if they go, somebody will pass away and there's no one there to look after them. So they don't go on holidays. And there's nobody that you can bring in to say, okay, well, we're going on 2 weeks holiday, can you look after my funeral home? That doesn't happen. I mean, and I know Ross has a lot of locums as well, and we don't have that ability because most people don't go, okay, I'm going to let you into my funeral home and away we go. So overwhelmingly, they're amazing. There are people out there who are in funeral directing for the wrong reasons. They're not good. They're not good funeral directors. But that can be said about any profession as well. But this is why I'm saying if you before you have an opportunity, you go and see them, you'll get a fair idea about whether they're good or not pretty quick as well. But overwhelmingly, from my perspective, having travelled extensively with that privilege, it's a wonderful fraternity. It's a wonderful fraternity.
Anyone else? While you're thinking, can I just add some words to what Darren was saying about the little brochure about your story? That is most helpful. When people come in and you're sitting with them and you're saying about, Dad was born in Beechworth and died in Albury, played social cricket and worked for the post office for 50 years. And they say, we'd like you to do the eulogy. You say, good. That means you need to start and ask some questions. But if it's written down, that helps us and the grieving person who I can't think of a thing, that helps them enormously too. Yeah. So they're there. Feel free to take them. Anybody else? No? The buses will wait. No? All right. We might wrap up. Anything else you want to finish with?
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Right.
And again, thanks for the privilege of joining you this morning and just being part of your service also, but also for you having me here, because I can imagine that seeing that perhaps on the list of what's coming up, you'd be thinking, I'm not sure about that. So I hope that I really appreciate you allowing me to be a part of your service this morning. So thank you.